Good evening. Thank you for joining with us on our online service this evening. Last month, during the month of December, I watched a series of presentations on Facebook that told the stories behind some of the well-known Christmas carols that we sing. And that got me thinking about some of the hymns that we know rather well. And I've started looking at some of the stories behind these hymns. And what I want to do this evening is just share with you one of the stories behind one of the hymns that we frequently sing. Before lockdown, when we were able to meet together as a church in the building, music and especially singing formed a major part of our services. It was something that we really enjoyed and something that we miss. And one of the hymns that we sung regularly, and indeed a favourite of mine, is a hymn called O Love That Wilt Not Let Me Go. It's a hymn that originates in Scotland. Indeed, it was written just probably about 30 miles as the crow flies from Stevenson, where Townhead Christian Fellowship, of course, is situated. It's a hymn of reflection, where the writer contrasts some of the uncertainties and the disappointments that he has experienced through life with the experience of his own Christian faith. The writer of the hymn is a man called George Matheson, and he was born in Glasgow in the mid-1800s. He was I think he was actually the oldest of 8 children, and as a youngster it became very apparent that he was a highly intelligent child. And it was no surprise as he got older when he decided that he wanted to go to university to study. He attended the University of Glasgow and he studied classics, logic and philosophy. What was quite remarkable was that he graduated with first-class honours in these subjects when he was only 19 years old. Now that's about the age now that students actually begin their university journey rather than when they graduate from their studies. However, it was while he was studying at university that there were 2 other life-changing events taking place in his life. The first was something that happens to many young men at university. He met someone and he fell in love and he got engaged to be married. The second thing that was happening was that he was beginning to have some serious health issues, and around about the time he was at university, he was diagnosed with an incurable eye problem, and he realised that very soon he would be completely blind. The low point in his life came when these 2 events coincided with each other. He spoke with his fiancée and he explained to her his plight and his medical condition and the fact that he was very soon going to be blind, and he asked if she was still willing to marry him. Her direct answer was that she did not wish to be the wife of a blind man, and she walked away from him, ending their engagement, ending their relationship, never to be seen again. That drove him into a dark place in his life psychologically, a dark place that paralleled the physical darkness that he would experience through his blindness. Matheson says of this particular period in his life, "It was through the deep trials of illness and desertion that I came to place all my faith and hope in the love of God in Jesus Christ. It was that experience which then motivated him to embark on undertaking another degree, this time theology and Christian history, and from there to become a minister and to share his faith. Of course, this time he was blind while studying and was supported by his sisters, who even went to the lengths of learning Latin and Hebrew and Greek to support and assist him in his studies. After graduating with his degree in theology and Christian studies, he took up the role of minister in a small church in a village called Inellin in the Cowal Peninsula. It's a lovely area in the west of Scotland if you've never been there. He was minister there for 18 years, and it was there in 1882, as he sat alone in the manse on the day of one of his sister's weddings, that he wrote this hymn. Matheson himself documents his reflections on writing this hymn, and he writes this: "My hymn was composed in the manse of Inellin on the evening of the 6th of June 1882. I was at that time alone. It was the day of my sister's marriage, and the rest of my family were staying overnight in Glasgow. Something had happened to me which was known only to myself, and which caused me the most extreme, severe mental suffering. This hymn was the fruit of that suffering. It was the quickest bit of work I ever did in my life. I had the impression of having it dictated to me by some inward voice than of working it out myself. I am quite sure that the whole work was completed in 5 minutes, and equally sure it never received at my hands any retouching or correction. I have no natural gift of rhythm. All the other verses I have written are manufactured articles. This one came like a dayspring from on high. I have never been able to gain once more the same fervour in verse." Four years later, George Matheson moved to Edinburgh to become minister at St Bernard's Parish Church. I think that's somewhere in Stockbridge. And he was there for the next 13 years of his life. It was during his tenure there that he was invited to Balmoral Estate to preach to the then Queen Victoria. And his sermon was entitled "The Patience of Job," and it was on the theme of hope in times of suffering. And Queen Victoria was so impressed by what she had heard that she actually had the sermon published and circulated widely to other members of the royal family for their learning and for their counsel. He went on to write a number of books. He wrote several other hymns which are not really so well known. Certainly I'm not familiar with any of them. But he was also invited to a number of universities as a guest lecturer to lecture and debate in an area that was of great interest to him, the area of faith, theology and science. He died very suddenly in 1906, and his remains were buried in the Glasgow Acropolis with his parents. But of course, over a century later, his hymn remains and lives on. One biographer writes of George Matheson: "He never married, and he lived with the pain of his rejection and the darkness of his blindness for the rest of his life. However, this became the foundation for his motivation in life, to demonstrate that he had found a love which would never let him go, and to preach that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." Another writer comments on this hymn and says this: "This hymn has endured, and it resonates because it reflects the lived experience of the writer, and yet at the same time it brings to the fore key concepts of the Christian faith." The writer goes on to say that the love that Matheson writes of and experienced has been documented for millennia since being captured in the Psalms 1000 years BC. That he found a light that shone where human eyes could not see. That he knew a joy that transcended the pain of loss and suffering. And all of this stemming from an unwavering faith in the death, the burial and resurrection of Jesus, which gave him strength to live and was the source of life beyond his life of darkness, pain and suffering. A musician by the name of Albert Peace read the words of this hymn and composed a tune for it to be sung to called Saint Margaret. He said that the writing of the tune was actually very akin to the writing of the hymn, that he actually had completed writing the music within around 5 minutes of starting. Now, if you go onto YouTube and you search for this hymn, "O Love That Wilt Not Let Me Go," you will find numerous versions, and I think all of them that I have come across are to this lovely tune, St. Margaret. In fact, that's the tune that has been playing quietly in the background as I have been speaking this evening. But there's another tune, a tune that I think I prefer, and I think that, although I'm not entirely sure, it was written by another Scottish musician by the name of James Roberts. And I leave you with a version of this hymn recorded a few months ago by some members of TCF. If you listen carefully, you will actually hear the third verse, and we do sing the tune St. Margaret. You may of course have heard this recording before, but this time as you listen to it, think and consider the story behind it, the experiences that brought it about, and the challenges that it perhaps brings, as we listen to a message of love, a message of light, a message of joy, and a message of life.
Oh, love that wilt not let me go, I rest my weary soul in thee. I give thee back the life I owe, that in thine ocean's depths its flow may richer, fuller be. Oh, like